Thank you, Jesse. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the September meeting of Manhattan Community Board 4's ACES Committee, Arts, Culture, Education, and Street Life. We are meeting virtually because Albany has unpaused our permission to do so. And we have a couple of really good items on the agenda tonight. We'll start with an open session like we always do. If anybody would like to speak, you'll have 2 minutes on the topic of your choice. And then we have a presentation from the office of our council member, Erik Bottcher, followed by a presentation by the team at Fountain House Arts on their programming. And we'll wrap up by talking about the statement of district needs and budget requests. As per the usual, at least when I'm facilitating, we will try to end promptly at or before 8:30. My track record is mixed, but I'll do what I can. Is there anyone who would like to speak in our open session, which is agenda item number 1? You can let us know by using the raise hand feature in Zoom. We'll give it a second, and if nobody indicates that they would like to speak, we'll move on to agenda item number 2.
We have Katie Savage has her hand raised.
Thank you for flagging that, because actually, oh, there we go. You want to bring her over, Jesse?
She's coming over now.
Awesome. Katie, it's nice to see you. Glad to have you back. I will start the timer at 2 minutes whenever you begin speaking.
All right. Hi, for those that don't know me, I'm Katie Savage, founder of the Hell's Kitchen Litter Legion. I just wanted to share some exciting news. We have officially received our 501c3 nonprofit status. I'm very excited about that. It means we can do some bigger events, more fun stuff. And I will also be applying for discretionary funding from Erik Bottcher's office. So I'm hoping a CB4 letter of support could be in the works. I have presented most recently January of 2021. So if it's something you want me to, do an update on at a future meeting before you write the letter, let me know. Happy to attend and let you know everything that's been going on with the Litter Legion. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Perhaps we should all plan on a new business item around a letter. Any other folks want to talk, though, in the open session before we move on to our regularly planned and scheduled presentations? All right. Sean, I think you are up. If you let Jesse know what you need in terms of things like screen share, he will oblige.
Thank you, Kit. No need for screen share. I think presentation is a bit of a grandiose term for this. I hope it's more of a conversation between us, or me, I should say, the universal royal us and you all, about what our budget process is internally for Erik's office and how we can more closely coordinate the allocations that we make through expense and capital funding with the statement of district needs that you all produce every year. I admit I'm a little bit nervous giving this presentation because one of your committee members is Matt Green, who served as a number of years as Corey Johnson's district director and deputy chief of staff and handled budget stuff for our office. So I am incredibly scared I'm going to say something wrong. So Matt, if you can be kind as I go, I'd be grateful. I'm sure you all know, as the city council member, we receive pots of money, discretionary local money that we allocate both expense and capital. Expense is money that goes towards operational costs. Capital goes towards, for lack of a better term, building things that have a useful life of, I believe, 5 years or more and have a minimum cost of $50,000 or more. And the majority of education investments, which I know is one of the important pieces that we wanted to talk about here tonight, that we as an office do, is through capital funding. We, this past January, February, and into March, Erik did a visit with every elementary school and middle school in our district and walked around with the principal and the PTA leadership to identify some of their outstanding capital needs, be it renovations of the restroom. Our auditorium that we use all the time has a terrible sound and lighting system. You name it, we heard it all at all the different schools that we visited, and it was really helpful in directing our attention for capital funding. We did a total of 24 capital allocations, so 24 different projects received capital funding from our office. 12 of those, half, went to schools in the district because we identified the outstanding capital needs of our schools as being an incredibly high priority for Erik and for the community. So we made sure to prioritize those there. For expense funding, it's a little bit more difficult to do direct funding to schools because expense funding can only go towards nonprofits, 501c3s. As Katie pointed out, Litter Legion is now a nonprofit. So Erik had checked in before because he wanted to do discretionary funding to Katie's group. Unfortunately, they weren't eligible. Now they will be. So the form that most of the expense discretionary investments come to schools come through initiatives, most of which called CASA, Cultural After School Adventures, in which we give money to organizations such as Inside Broadway, the Intrepid Museum, and they do after school programming in schools through that funding. So that's the majority of the expense funding that goes towards schools. There are some other investments in nonprofits, and we encourage them to do partnerships with our schools. One of them, I think it's Shadowbox Theater. They do incredible programming with the school that's co-located at PS 33 in Chelsea for children with disabilities. They do some pretty incredible work there, but we can't, I'm honestly, and Matt can add me if there's an exception I'm not thinking of. I can't think of a world in which we can do direct expense funding to a school because there isn't a nonprofit through which that money can go. So that's the sort of overview of the educational piece. I think what Alan, Kit, and I had talked about in a meeting, I don't know, maybe last month, was how we can more closely coordinate the priorities of Community Board 4 and of this committee as far as educational investments go with our discretional capital. One of the things that Erik did with the WPE, the Waterfront Parks and Environment Committee, was did a walkthrough with Marty and Leslie and some other community board members through all the different parks in Community Board 4 to help identify what some of the priorities were for the community board. You know, and I don't want to discredit the statement of district needs. It is important, but Erik and I are both very visual people, very tactile people. So it's incredibly helpful. That's why we did the tours of the school, because it really helps us remember and visualize the investments that are necessary when you see it, rather than when you just kind of read about it. So I think that is one thing that was incredibly helpful and led to the $4 million investment in Penn South Playground for the total renovation of that. Was it was highlighted as a key priority of the committee and of Community Board 4 during that walkthrough. I think one of the things that Alan, Kit, and I talked about was trying to more closely coordinate some of our school visits with you all so that the statement of district needs that you all put out, I don't want to edit myself, is more closely aligned. The one thing that we addressed in that meeting that makes it tricky is you all, the timeline is very demanding for you all on your statement of district needs. You have to put that out in the fall when most budget allocations aren't actually done until the spring. So it's a bit of an unaligned timeline in that way that makes it a little bit more difficult for us to totally coordinate. But I think that's something we're really interested in the months ahead, especially as you all begin the focus on the statement of district needs, to make sure that we are not just repeating your efforts, that you all do such incredible work in the fall to talk to the principals, to talk to the PTA, to talk to the schools, and identify those priorities. We partner with you now so that we aren't attempting to reinvent the wheel come springtime when we start making our decisions and allocations for capital funding. So I think that's education. I'm happy to stop there and talk about that a piece before we shift over to sanitation. If that makes sense to Kit and Alan, you let me know. It's your your dance. I'm just
If
here to
you're comfortable with it, Sean, I'd actually recommend going all the way through everything that you want to cover and then letting the
Great.
committee members sort of dive in with questions where they have them. Sometimes when we open things up for questions, it's hard to close that Pandora's box.
Absolutely. I understand. So sanitation, that's going to be primarily all expense. The one kind of exception that I think Councilmember Kalos tried a year or two ago was to allocate capital funding to hire to bring about smaller cleaning vehicles for bike lanes. I think both for sanitation and for snow, and that was deemed ineligible by the unending void of city bureaucracy that ultimately tells us whether or not we're allowed to spend the money the way we want to spend the money. So I don't think there really are any capital options for sanitation available to us. The majority of the expense money, as I said, it has to go through a nonprofit. So a lot of it will go through some initiatives that the city council has. Cleanup NYC is a big one that each city council district is given, I think, around $300,000 to dedicate to nonprofits that do cleanup work in the city. A lot of that goes to a group called ACE, which hires, you've probably seen them around in the neighborhoods in their red outfits. They hire formerly homeless individuals and train them in skills to prepare them for the workforce. They do incredible work, and we've been really pleased with the partnership that they have. They're very responsive. Another group that we are working with this year is the New York Sanitation Foundation, which is the nonprofit arm of the sanitation department. And they are going to be partnering with groups like Katie's group to do community cleanups and to do supplemental efforts to Katie's great work in Hell's Kitchen and to do some additional work with community members in Chelsea and the West Village as well. So those are going to be our local priorities for sanitation, to just do our best to make the streets as clean as possible. The city council as a whole, this last budget season, got a pretty big win in restoring corner basket pickup to twice a day, 7 days a week, all across citywide. All love and respect to our colleagues in the outer boroughs. We get a bit more foot traffic on a day-to-day basis in our district than some other districts do. So it being uniform citywide is certainly laudable from a geographic equity standpoint, but from a need standpoint, it may not totally get there. So that's where a lot of our additional supplemental sanitation services go, towards additional corner litter basket cleanup. One of the things that we are going to be pushing for, and that is going to be another big council push. We didn't quite get there this year, or last year, I should say, in the FY23 budget, but there's legislation that Erik is a co-prime sponsor of to mandate the return of the citywide curbside composting program. That's going to be a major budget priority of the council again this year. You may have seen, I think it's starting October 3rd, the entire borough of Queens will have curbside composting returned to it. Again, all love and respect to our colleagues out in Queens, but one of the major complaints that we heard about from the Department of Sanitation about why curbside composting was reduced was the lack of volume, the lack of density in areas, that they would go out and it really wasn't worth it to send out a truck to have one compost bin on every third block. And, we have one of the, if not the most dense and voluminous areas in the entire city. So if the issue was before that you weren't getting the bang for the buck on the return of the program, it's odd to me that they would return the program in a less dense borough than in Manhattan. But hopefully it serves as a successful test case and motivates the administration to expand the program even further and bring it back to Manhattan. So those are going to be some of the local pushes, the more focused cleanups, the community cleanups, the supplemental sanitation services in the areas that are particularly needing of them. And then I think our push for a citywide push for the council is going to be the return of curbside composting. It's going to be really important to get our Zero to the Landfill pledge that the city has. One thing, I'll add, this is kind of an Erik Bottcher special. One of the things that he wants to push for, that we will see how much of an appetite there is a program called Save As You Throw, which charges for landfill-bound waste. The idea being you create a financial incentive to divert as much waste as possible into recycling and compost by charging by tonnage for landfill-bound waste. There had been, I believe it was, there's a zero one way or the other. It's $100,000 or $1 million that had previously been allocated for a study of this program that had been scrapped. So that's going to be one of our big pushes that I think Erik might be one of the loner voices on, because I think there is some concern by some about charging people for a basic government necessity, such as sanitation services. We would make the argument that you are actually saving money for those who are currently subsidizing folks who do not do composting and recycling, because we as a city are paying for that landfill bound waste. So if you do compost and you do recycle, you actually pay an unfair amount towards sanitation services. We'll see how many people are convinced by that argument that I make, but I think that's something that we are excited to be a leading voice on. So I think that pretty much covers it for sanitation as well. But again, I'm sure there are dozens of things that I forgot that I'm happy to address through your questions.
Thanks for sharing all of that, Sean. We'll go to questions in the order that we see them. And when committee members have all had a chance to get their questions answered, we'll also open it up to folks from the public who might have questions. Alan, it looks like you're first, and then it'll be Sabrina.
Thank you, Sean. And thank you in your office for all the good stuff you guys have been doing. When we spoke, I guess it was last month at our meeting, we spoke about the lack of response that we get from DOE on a lot of our requests. As mentioned, the last 6 years, approximately 80% of what we've requested has been in some form denied. Either there's no funding, or they have to study it, or go seek this from your electeds. So the thought, well, personally, my thought was that, what can we be doing differently? As you mentioned, we do this in October. You guys have been doing this in September. So it's not so much you're stepping on our toes, but it seems like we might be stepping on your toes, because we're going to reach out to the same folks that you have already reached out to and made your funding. So what I was trying to find out, and maybe there's no hard answer for that right now, but it seems most of what we've been declined are the tech upgrades, a lot of stuff in the classroom. We've been getting some good feedback in terms of the capital stuff that we asked for, but I guess maybe that goes to SCA and they feel that they have to do what they have to do, and it's different maybe with DOE expenses. So where can we put our efforts? Okay, obviously the principals are going to go to you. They're going to go to the borough president's office. Last year, I think the borough president's office spent in our district on 15 schools over $1 million in funding, and most of it was tech support. The council members spent well over $300,000 plus a big number for an auditorium expansion. So I was just, if there's some way we could maybe look at advocating for the schools in a different way, so we're both not stepping on each other's toes. If there's some other aspect of school work and advocacy that we can zero in on, that we can get DOE to put the money up for these requests, as opposed to getting this just negativism that I see on their part. So again, I don't know if that's an easy thing to answer in terms of what we can do, but your suggestions will be good.
It's a really good point, because I think it raises an important omission in my remarks that is an unfortunate reflection of reality, which is, you mentioned SCA. For folks who don't know, it's a school construction authority. It's the authority that's responsible for basically doing capital building, building things for the Department of Education. The idea is an authority is approved by Albany, and it is supposed to make things more efficient to build. As frustrating as it can feel like to have educational things built, when you compare it to something like the Parks Department that does not have an authority, their turnaround is actually a bit faster for education things because of the school construction authority. The frustrating thing that you point out, Alan, that I just omitted because it's almost feels like such a lost cause, is the council member and the borough president aren't the only ones who can fund school projects. Like, you're absolutely right. So you submit the list to the school construction authority, and the school construction authority is the one that provides the feedback that you said, that it's needs more information, needs more study. Now we're not really thinking about it. Oh, you should go to your local elected officials. And that's really frustrating because, as I said, we only have $5 million in discretionary capital to give to not just schools, but to nonprofits, to cultural organizations. We have everything that wants something built. Supportive housing is something we get a lot of capital requests for. Encore on 49th, Encore Community Services, their Encore housing, their senior supportive housing needed a massive renovation that we did capital funding to. So it is incredibly frustrating to us, as I'm sure it is to you all, that the answer so often from an organization like the School Construction Authority, which is the central authority responsible for building things for New York City school, the response is so often, talk to your local elected official and have them take care of it. So that is frustrating, but often that is the only thing that we can truly count on to get the job done. So I think that is one way that we can collaborate more closely, is to ensure that some amount of our $5 million in capital, and as you said, the amount of capital that Borough President Mark Levine is able to allocate to our district, that the three of us are in close working connection there, so that when we identify must-fund projects in Community Board 4, that we say, okay, this is a project that it's expensive, it's $1 million, but we think it's really, really important. And if it's something that the council member can do 500,000 on, and the borough president can do 500,000 on, or the council, we can each split 500,000 and advocate to the speaker's office to get, that's the kind of thing that we can view as more of a guarantee, that we can say, okay, we are for sure getting this. We want to make sure that this priority for us and for Borough President Levine and Community Board 4 and the school, that gets done, check the box, that's finished. And then we move to the advocating point with SCA and with the administration to say, okay, look, as in a sign of good faith, we allocated this much money to this capital project for schools. All right, we did our part. Now we need you to step up and fund this project that's way beyond. A really great example, I think it's the Quest for Learn school. They have a swimming pool that needs basically a complete soup to nuts renovation. And I think the price tag is like $6 million, which again is more than the entire capital discretionary allotment our office gets for the entire year. So it just isn't possible for us to do that. That's the kind of thing that we need something like the School Construction Authority to get behind and to fund. And I think that's where, if we are aligned on the smaller things that we have direct control over, we can then be aligned on the larger projects to go to the School Construction Authority. And I think the answer is, honestly, you're only going to get 1 or 2 big wins every year. And if we hand in something that has 20 projects, we can get feedback on all 20. But if we have the top 2 that we say, all right, these are the 2. These are the 2 that this year we're doing a hard push on, you're doing a hard push on, and Borough President Levine is going to do a hard push on, then hopefully we can get those big wins and then come back next year and try to get 2 more big wins. I'd say that's the strategy that I think would be most effective for us to coordinate, both on a local discretionary aspect for ours, making sure that the stuff that we guarantee we can fund, are also a priority for you all, and then working together to identify those big price tag items that we can all do joint advocacy on to the administration and really make a lot of noise.
Mhm. Gotcha. All right, that's helpful. I guess what we need to do as a committee is sit down and kind of reorient when we start this whole process, and break it down that way first, and then try to coordinate with you and with the principals also, or the superintendent, the different segments. Thank you. I'll move on. Thank you. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Alan. Sabrina, you're up, and then it'll be Katie.
Sure. Thank you for your presentation, Sean. It was announced today that we are going to have a PEG, which is a program to eliminate the gap from the mayor's office, for the mayor. And it's going to be 3% cuts across all of the city agencies, which includes the Department of Education and Department of Sanitation we were just talking about. So, obviously this is too early in the process. We don't know which programs are going to be cut or what's going to be decreased. But overall, I'm a little concerned, because as a Hell's Kitchen resident, and full disclosure, I work for OMB, so that's my full-time job. But as a resident and as a community board member, I am concerned because, particularly, we all know the devastation that COVID has led us to our neighborhood and education, the regress that the kids have had because of COVID. And I'm not going to, sanitation and all the problems that we had. So again, it's too early in the process. We don't know what programs are going to be cut or affected by this, but 3% for this year and fiscal year 24 is 4.75. So it's significant. I'm kind of curious if your office, how are you going to assess this? Is it a pushback or how are we going to approach this? Thank you.
Oh, it's a great question. I think you laid it out pretty well about the proposed PEG. For those who don't know how the overall city budget process works, it is a process of kind of a call and response, as it were. So the mayor proposes the initial budget, the council provides feedback through hearings of different committees. Then the mayor has a revised executive budget, the council provides feedback with more hearings, and then there is kind of a final adopted budget. So I think how I would view this is as sort of callous as it sounds, and it sort of is, it feels like sort of an opening salvo by the mayor in the FY24 budget negotiations. That this is his initial position of saying, this is where we are going to start. And it sort of puts the onus on the council to respond. Do I think that is a strategically sound move if your goal is to arrive at a city budget that is ultimately smaller than one that is possible? I do. Do I think the city council thinks that's where we should be as a city with our budget? I don't think we do. I think one of the major pieces of feedback that the council provided during the FY23 budget was it felt as though it were an austerity budget in a time in which we were not austere, that we had an above estimation revenue through, I'm telling Sabrina things that she already knows, but we had above than expected intake through our tax revenues, and the position of the administration throughout the budget negotiating process seemed to be one of, we need to cut, there's not enough money. Well-intended people can have different positions. There are entire academic fields of economics, of people who have different views of how things should play out. I think we are of the position that pegs are ultimately unfair because it puts everything on the same level. And there are just things that are kind of objectively through human experience more important, health, housing, education, fine. I don't want to pinpoint and pick on individual agencies that perhaps their calling is slightly less urgent than those other ones. But the idea of a peg, I think, inherently creates an idea that every agency and every service is equal, which we don't necessarily agree with. I think there is a case to be made, as we saw with this last budget negotiation. The position, as we heard it from OMB, was the Department of Education's budget has enough money in it. You need to talk to the Department of Education about where that $30 billion is being spent. That it's not there, that in the budget negotiating process, OMB's sort of position, as it was relayed to me through the Speaker's office, or I should say, as it was related to the council members through the Speaker's office, was that we do not want to give the Department of Education any more money. Their budget is large enough. You just need to talk to them about how they are spending that money. I think that is some of the case that the Adams administration will make, is we need to cut on, the classic government lexicon. There's bloat. We need to cut down on the bloat. We need to cut down on the people in office jobs. We need to cut down on the expensive contracts. In conversations that we've had with Commissioner Banks from the Department of Education, or Chancellor Banks, I should say, from the Department of Education, some of his senior staff, they disagree with that assessment. They do not feel that there is a lot of bloat in their budget, that a lot of it is allocated towards incredibly important programs, that they are seeking to do cuts where they can. I think you will hear from the agencies themselves come budget negotiating time, when they are testifying in front of the council, that they're going to have a very hard time finding that either 3% or 4.5%, depending on where the inflation numbers fall, in cuts. And I think that's something that the council is going to push back very hard on, because if we are not, it is not fair for us to take money from the taxpayers and not return it in services that do not meet the need of the services. Obviously, we need to have reserves. We need to have rainy day funds. We saw in 2020 how desperately important those reserves and those rainy day funds are. But we need to meet our fiscal responsibility and then provide the services that the city of New York and our constituents need. We don't need to be overly cautious at the cost of the services that we are providing, especially to students.
Katie, all of you, and then it'll be Matt.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Sean. And just so I guess I would make a suggestion, and then I have a question. So my suggestion is, I thought it was a great point you made about the importance of coordinated advocacy when we're thinking about these budgetary, sort of how to achieve at least a few education-related budget goals each year. I know you talked about the importance of coordinated advocacy, and I would just say that I think we also need to include the CEC, because they're also, the Community Education Council is also looking at some of these issues. We just need to make sure that everybody feels like there's a pretty clear nexus of where the decisions can be made about what's being prioritized. Because I think it's also, as a former parent leader, I think it's really hard for parents to know, like, who do we go advocate to try and make sure that some of these things happen in our schools? So I think it would be great if we can figure out to make sure that that happens in a coordinated way.
That's a great point.
Thank you. And then my question to you, in fact, I was going to bring this up under new business for our committee to suggest that maybe ACES deals with our other committee, HHHS, that I'm on, in connection with the influx of immigrant families who came into the city and into our schools late this summer. And it feels like there are a lot of needs there that to meet. I know that Councilmember Bottcher was working in August to see, about sort of helping to coordinate some things for those families who are coming in. Anyway, I was just wondering if you have heard anything yet, because I've heard about some 501c3s doing work in this area, but I was just wondering from your perspective, if there are 501c3s working to help support these students, either in the shelters and in the schools, is that something that you envision could be part of, this budget request? An expense, because it would be supporting a 501c3.
No, absolutely. I want to put a link in the chat, which there
Do we
is
have a
not.
chat?
I will send it to Jesse. There is a group. I'll try to take it in pieces as I remember it. Oh, let me say off the top, Katie, you have excellent Zoom nonverbal communication. While I was talking, I was looking at you a lot because there was a lot of nodding. It was very helpful. It was great. So thank you for that.
There you go.
Fantastic stuff. I'm
A
big
small
fan.
gift.
That's there's a group, Team TLC NYC. It's I don't know if it's an offshoot or something. It's of a group, Grannies Respond. So they've been at Port Authority Bus Terminal for many mornings in the past couple of months, greeting asylum seekers as they enter the city and providing items and resources to them. We were lucky to coordinate a donation from Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS of $10,000 to them a few weeks ago to support that work. So they're doing really incredible work. We have the tricky part is they are very much filling a need, but there are countless other needs that other organizations are also filling. So for example, we heard from Covenant House, an incredible nonprofit in Hell's Kitchen at 41, 40 and 10th, around there, who serve runaway and homeless youth. And they also provide legal services. And so their attorney, they've reached out to us and have said that their legal service attorney is basically now a full-time immigration attorney, and that some of their other support staff are actually basically becoming immigration paralegals because the demand is so high. We've heard the same thing from New Alternatives for Children, another nonprofit in our district, who say that they are completely overwhelmed with the number of the requests for services that they are receiving from asylum seekers who have come into the city. So even while you have some amazing nonprofits that are doing dedicated work toward that, even the nonprofits who are doing amazing work not dedicated toward that are still being completely subsumed by the need. We've done a lot of advocacy with the administration trying to access additional services for those folks to varying degrees of success. To your point about, so that's one piece. The nonprofit piece of it, I think, is incredibly important, and I think is certainly a way that we can seek through the discretionary expense funding to provide support. One of the things that we did with a lot of the organizations that we just did our most recent batch of allocations, the allocating process, there are different kind of windows of it. So the first one is the local expense. So that's where you have total flexibility. Any nonprofit that you want to give money to, you can give money to them. Then the council has different pots called initiatives that are much more focused. So I already kind of mentioned the Cleanup NYC initiative, the Cultural After School Adventure initiative. Those are more specific initiatives. So for those later initiatives that we did allocations for, one of the things that we specifically asked was, can you do specific programming either at shelters that are providing services for these asylum seekers, or at the schools that are taking in? So for those of you who don't know, there is a temporary shelter in Hell's Kitchen. The primary recipient of those children will be PS 111 at 53rd and 10th. And the sort of the spillover site, when there is an excess of students such that the PS 111 doesn't have the capability of providing classroom space, they will then go to PS 51 on 44th Street. So we have directed programming for such a like drag queen story hour. We did expense discretionary funding to them and asked them to direct their programming towards PS 111 and PS 51. There is a Spanish language based sort of puppetry group that we have specifically connected to the organizations providing support to the asylum seeking families in our district. So you're absolutely right. There are a lot of opportunities for coordination. I'll be honest, I didn't think about it. That was really an all Erik thing of really questioning each allocation that we gave in the past couple of months and saying, how can we direct more support toward both these families seeking asylum and the students seeking asylum, and to the schools that are taking in these students, because there'll be increased need. For those of you who don't know, PS 111, where a lot of these students are going, is already a Title I school that serves a lot of at-risk and children with higher needs. So we want to make sure we provide them with as much support as possible as they take in these more students. We did with Community Board 4 a very successful donation drive of items. I might argue too successful. I was very sweaty by the end that we had taken everything over to the Skyline Hotel, but we also did drop-offs to PS 111 and PS 51 to do supplies as well. So we absolutely are looking for every opportunity to work with you and the nonprofits and the schools. My last point on this is first day of school was last Thursday. So Wednesday, we made sure to have a check-in with Principal Gilligan and Principal Lucas from PS 111 and PS 51, with the DOE central staff and Superintendent Kelly McGuire and the Department of Homeless Services staff who are responsible for the family shelters, to ensure, because the council had a hearing on this maybe 6 weeks ago, and the focus of Erik's questions were, what is DHS doing to coordinate with the Department of Education to make sure that the schools where these children are going are prepared? Because it isn't just, the head count formula where, oh, you have 30 new students, here's X number of more dollars. We also need to make sure that the programming is highly specific and catered, because one of the great points that we heard from the Department of Homeless Services is that not every student coming in with an asylum seeking family has the same level of needs. Some of them are already fluent in English. Some of them have, mixed language abilities. Some have no English whatsoever. So it's not just enough to say, oh, yes, here is English as a second language programming. You're welcome. You can go now. There are so many different nuances and specificities of programming that need to be provided. And so it's really incredible to sit with Principal Gilligan and Principal Lucas and Superintendent McGuire and just go piece by piece to make sure that everything that they needed and that was still outstanding was being addressed by the Department of Education, so that starting day one, we were in a position to succeed. We need to do some follow-up with them. We heard day one and day two were smooth on Thursday and Friday, but obviously we want to check back in with them today and tomorrow to make sure everything's still going well.
Okay, great. That's super helpful. Thank you.
Matt, your turn, followed by Blake.
Here we go.
Hey, Sean, good to see you. Great presentation. Couldn't have done it better myself, and appreciate all this good information tonight. Really important topics. So I'm glad you mentioned the donation drive. I want to thank your office for organizing that at PS 111 and including the board and getting a lot of donations for the new families that are arriving here in New York City. I had a couple questions and a few things, just some thoughts. I think you're sort of the way that you outlined prioritizing capital projects and making sure that we're advocating with you all on some of those larger items is a good strategy. And if there's a way that we can share information as soon as possible about what those big items are, it would be great to sort of just cross-check our lists together and make sure we're on the same page with some of those big ticket items. But I think that's a smart way to try to get some of those projects over the finish line, or at least started. And then I also just wanted to mention, my question actually was about the curbside composting. So it's great to hear that Erik sounded like has some legislation about this. But my question is, I know last year DSNY was asking folks to sign up. If they wanted curbside composting, go to this website, put in your information. We'll get to you as soon as you can. And they were organizing that by community board. And at the time, this community board, according to DSNY, didn't have enough signups to justify creating a composting route for their trucks. So I'm just wondering, since last year, do you have any information about, are those signups still useful? Is that something that we should be encouraging community members to do at this point? Or is it really just like a question of funding that, as we put together our district needs, is this a funding question that we need to get behind as well? Or maybe it's a question of legislation as well. So anything you might have on that front, I'd be curious about.
So for those of you who saw me do this while Matt was talking about signups, that was not me trying to stop him. That was me saying that Community Board 4 was #1 in signups for curbside composting. That when we met, so I'm just going to speak freely here. We had a meeting with the Department of Sanitation and the former Sanitation Commissioner Grayson in February or March. And at that time, curbside composting was still being rolled out. So for those of you who don't know, curbside composting existed everywhere. We had it, and then they drew it back during the pandemic because they're like, look, we can't deal with this right now. Fine. Then they were rolling it back out by, as Matt said, community board. And it is rolled out to like 6 community boards. And as he said, they were expanding it based on the number of signups. So we meet with the Department of Sanitation and then Commissioner Grayson in, let's say March. And they're like, okay, we know this is a big thing for you. We know composting is important. Good news, we're rolling out the next tranche of curbside composting districts in the next, they said like 4 to 6 weeks. And they pulled out the graph and they said Community Board 4 is #1 in signups by like not an insignificant number either. Like #2 wasn't all that close. And so that's the next one to come out. That's the next one to come out. And then, I don't know, 3 weeks later, Mayor Adams had announced that they were halting the further expansion of curbside composting. It was our belief at that time and still now that sanitation is very interested in the expansion of curbside composting. That it was a decision that was made within the administration and the mayor's office based on what they perceived to be purely budget reasons, and that sanitation is still very hot to trot on bringing this back out, which is why if you go to the curbside composting page for sanitation, you can see that they're still taking signups. Even now, you can still sign up for curbside composting, a program that is not available to you. And the purpose for that is I think they are holding out hope that, especially with the news coming out of Queens of borough-wide composting in Queens, that expansion is back on the table and they just kind of need a little bit more proof of concept to make it work. So on the one hand, I don't want to say, yes, use your time and energy to get people to sign up for curbside composting on the Department of Sanitation's website when we are being told very actively right now that expansion in Manhattan is not on the table. At the same time, it is a nice number to be able to point to say we have the highest demand in the entire city of New York for the program of curbside composting. So on the one hand, you're certainly not shouting into a void. The numbers are being looked at, the numbers are being reviewed, and they are being used as a metric. I just don't know when that metric is going to be used again, if that makes sense. So it's a big push we're going to do. We would love to have people more signing up, but on the kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's a bit of a luxury for us at this point compared to some of the other priorities that we're looking at. What was I going to say about your first point about coordination? I don't know. I'm sure it was great. was a good point, and I agree wholeheartedly.
Blake, and then the last hand that I'm seeing is David Warren. If we don't have any other questions from the committee, we can open it up to folks from the public. Looks like we'll go actually back to Alan and back to Jesse before we do that. Sorry, Blake, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Sean. I think it's very helpful, especially on the sanitation side, to hear some of the upcoming issues for the committee, since I think it helps us to tailor the areas that we're writing letters or soliciting community feedback on. And so appreciate the presentation, and always open to hearing in the future of other issues where the council member in the office wants to hear from the board. And but I do have a specific question, and I appreciate the office and the council members' advocacy on the horse issue. And I was wondering if the office has looked as well into the police horses, which I think has a sanitation implication where they don't have the same kind of poop bag requirements as the carriage horses, and are I don't think anyone's responsible for cleaning up the poop from those horses. And I think also on the cost benefit side, I think there's a question mark in my mind anyway as to whether it's the most economical means of transport. So, given the council member's work on both the poop issue with the dogs and the horses, if that was another area that he was looking into.
Yeah, it's first off, there is no poop fairy campaign. I'd love to hear the echoes of that still bouncing around in people's minds. It's an interesting point, and I will admit it's one that I have not given a lot of thought to. I don't want to speak for the council member because he thinks about a lot more things than I do. It's certainly an interesting point. I would say as a cyclist, I certainly have more than once been biking down the 9th Avenue bike lane and gone, swerved around a particularly sizable pile. Yeah, it's a good question. Let me take that. I wish I could speak more about it now, but I'll be honest, I don't have a ton on that right now. So let me take that back to some folks, have some conversations, and see, because I am interested. It's a very interesting question, and I would love to talk more about it. I absolutely agree. I'm happy to provide some follow-up on some of those sanitation priorities. Oh, I remember the follow-up to Matt's thing. Sanitation priorities, absolutely. We'll follow up on some of that to Alan and Kit. And then Matt had talked about sending some supplementary information over. I had sent to Alan and Kit, and hopefully they can share with you all as is helpful and appropriate. The list of school capital funding. Sorry, Matt, you can turn your camera back off. You go back to eating. I don't want to interrupt. I'm sorry. The list of projects that we funded through capital allocations and the total list of requests that we had from the schools. It is the list that we got from the schools is a bit of a Gordian knot. I'm not going to lie. It was sort of like, it's not prioritized. It's not, from A to Z, 1 to 99 or whatever. It's just kind of the principles being like, here's everything I could potentially think about as being an issue. And we sort of drew the top priorities from each school, but I think that's a good starting place of coordinating for next year, is taking that total list of projects that we received from all the schools and sending it back to all the principals and saying, okay, here's what we were able to do last year. Here's what's still outstanding. Is there a number one out of all these that you want us to push for? And if not, is there a new project that's not on this list that you want us to push for? And that's a place where instead of kind of repeating work, we're kind of standing on each other's shoulders, where we did the work this spring to put together this giant list of outstanding capital requests from all the schools. And then maybe as you all enter into your next phase that you are coming up to, you can use that as a starting point for follow-up with the schools to say, hey, we got this from Councilmember Bottcher's office of all the stuff you said you were interested in kind of last year. As we look ahead next year, can you sort of go through these 7 projects that you listed out and let us know kind of still what you're still interested in, if anything has risen in your priority order or lowered? I think that's one way that we can coordinate in a really kind of nice, each of us progressing on the work of each other way. So to Alan, Blake, I will absolutely send over information to Jesse and Kit and Alan, just a write-up of some of the sanitation priorities that I know we're going to be looking at. And hopefully the information I sent to Alan and Kit before can kind of serve as a starting point of our collaboration on school projects this upcoming year.
Thank you.
David Warren, and we're going back to Alan and then to Jesse.
Hey, Sean, it's great to see you. Thank you for your presentation. First of all, I want to thank you for working with these new guests coming into our country. It's very difficult when people immigrate over. I'm hoping there might be some program to help them assimilate and become citizens, but that, especially in the school system, teach them, you know, in my great-grandparents' day, they would teach them how to become Americans. I know that might sound old-fashioned. But my question is actually on a totally different angle. It's dealing with sanitation. Is I've been reading that there are these bins which are rodent-proof if they're sealed, and those same bins, depending on the company and the way the sanitation trucks are designed, can then be picked up by the trucks much more easily than the old school garbage cans, let's say. I mean, when you see a garbage truck from the 50s, you know, these where they can, the truck can actually hinge on to where the containers are and just dump them in. Is Eric and you working with that? What's going on with that? Because, you know, and also want to make sure that we don't take up pedestrian space, sidewalk space that it occurs in the street.
Yeah, it's containerization. Oh, we could have a whole other, if you guys want to invite me back one month just to talk about containerization, maybe we could do it. You sort of alluded to it being an old-fashioned technique, which is true in some ways, and in other cities and countries around the world, it's an incredibly modern thing that they're doing right now. In some ways, our current practice of piling our garbage on the street is practically medieval in its conception. So containerization, I think, is very much the way of the future. It's been the focus of a sanitation committee hearing. It was what Eric talked about all the time. Eric did I think he's done 2 for Streets blog, one before he was elected and after, talking about containerization. And as you said, one of the benefits are, you know, legion. As you said, rat proof, getting them, there's nothing better for a rat than just a sheer plastic bag that it can gnaw through to get to all of the food that we put in our garbage now because we don't have curbside composting. There is just the increase of pedestrian space that right now all of this garbage is being piled on the sidewalks instead of in the street. So we are forcing those with mobility issues or wheelchair users or parents using strollers or, you know, young women trying to recreate Sex in the City by walking 4 in a row. It just makes the sidewalk unusable in so many of those situations for things like that. And then pedestrian space, and just like not having garbage on our streets, which I mean is kind of a no-brainer. Just seems really positive. We are not ignorant to the fact that New York City is a very large and complicated city, and that block by block, the needs can vary wildly. You know, within Community Board 4, you have a place like London Terrace that is incredibly dense. And then just immediately across the street, you have more single family or multifamily 4-story townhomes that the needs of those 2 blocks are incredibly different despite their proximity to one another. So we are perfectly comfortable with not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good and starting small, starting and showing proof of concepts, whether they be in business improvement districts. One of the things we've seen as a pilot program in the Times Square area with the Times Square Alliance is the Clean Curbs program with the city bins. So they take a lot of this commercial trash and they move it where it would have been on the sidewalk piled up. They move it into containers that are positioned on the street in order to make up more pedestrian space, reduce the amount of food and access for rodents, and make it just look nicer. They are expanding that pilot actually to 45th Street between 9th and 10th in a residential area. So we're really excited about that. The one thing is these small pilots don't have that component that you described of coordinating the container with the truck. So there is an automated nature to it. It's still sanitation workers, unlocking it and grabbing bags. That's another benefit. Like, it's not safe or fair to our sanitation workers to be having just to grab bags of garbage and throw them into trucks. I could go on for hours, and will gladly if you invite me back. But containerization is 100% a priority of ours in the coming budget, and to push for pilot programs to show proof of concept in commercial and residential corridors around the city. Start small, show it can work out the kinks, and then grow it and grow it and grow it until hopefully we can all laugh about the time when we used to pile up trash on the sidewalk. Like, again, we were London in the dark ages.
Quick question. Is Erik worked with the unions on this, the sanitation unions?
We have had conversations with Harry Nespoli and his crew, some preliminary conversations. They're not opposed conceptually, but of course, we just need to make it work. As I said, it's not entirely fair to sanitation workers now to have them, grabbing, even with gloves, things with their hands and throwing them into the truck, and then being yelled at when loose trash that's been thrown on top of the bags is left behind because they can't stop for 30 seconds in each spot and pick up loose trash that was left behind. We believe that this is beneficial to all parties involved. It's just going to take a lot of work and a lot of investment. But if we're not willing to do big stuff, we'll never get big stuff done.
All good, David? Alan, you're up.
Thanks, Sean. It'll be interesting to see how that pilot program on 45th Street works out. It's a long time coming. But I just wanted to follow up quickly with your conversation with Katie on programming. And it's something that actually Kit and I were talking about the other day. We asked for smart boards, we asked for construction, we asked for social workers. How do you see us possibly making budget requests, programming budget requests? Schools have different needs, have different audiences, different student bases. Would programming requests be something that you think DOE might look at seriously in terms of funding? If we can get something, a groundswell going with the schools, with the superintendent, with the principals, and
I think there is a lot of room to be creative as far as programming in individual schools go. So I think that there are opportunities out. So, and again, I don't know that, but this is sort of just general conversations we've had with the Department of Education about highlighting and supporting and amplifying some specific great programming work that some schools are doing. So they've sort of said, hey, if you've got a school that has a really great so-and-so program but needs some additional support, let us know. And obviously, like, it's not just supporting what is good, it's also lifting up what needs extra support. So I think that is an opportunity for you all to sort of list that out publicly and send that in the Department of Education, and then allow us to push that internally with DOE to sort of say, hey, we support. And I think this is, again, it allows us to frame it as we are supporting this request from the community, which I think has more legs than just a request coming from our office. I think our office saying something, they're like, okay, this is like what one principal or one teacher said to Eric, and Eric is saying it to us. You know, there's credence to that, but not as much as this is coming from our local community board. These are some specific programming areas or programs or operations in specific schools that we want to see supported. I think that is something that we can more strongly amplify and support from you all than us just sort of submitting a list and saying, yeah, here's what we're thinking. You also, oh, shoot, Alan, you reminded me of something else. Dickens, it'll come back to me. Let's see.
I'll try to be quick. I have two questions, Sean. To your knowledge, in our current budget requests, we had two big expense requests, which we have always. I mean, some of them have been going there forever. One was for social workers. I think Alan just touched on it in schools. I'm still not clear whether we have a social worker in every school, and is that temporary based off of the council's funding of that. I remember this is your time when you guys got a significant amount of money towards, I think, social workers in schools, but I still don't know whether we can say we could check that box and say we've got a social worker in every school. And then the second one on expense is basket pickup. I believe we're better than we were, but I don't know if we're back to where we should be. and so that was my question to you, is whether those two items are on our, have been and continue to be on our budget requests. And every time we get, as Alan knows, a very unhelpful, not very informative answer of saying either we have to study this, we'll try our best to fulfill it in the current budget, under the current amount of budget, but that doesn't tell us whether it's been done or not. And so those are the two questions I had.
Yeah,
and I really appreciate the list of unfunded projects, which gives us, rather than us beating down the door of a principal's office to make them create a project or think of something, then at least what we can do is say, these are to our knowledge, these are the projects that you have suggested or requested. As to whether their legitimacy or their priority, we do not know. It's up to them to tell us, and then we can choose to, advocate for them if we want. But
yeah, that's the good and bad of capital projects, right? They never go away, but they also never go away. So what was a request last year is still a request this year because it didn't get funded. Which makes it a little bit easier, but it continues to be a problem. So as you said, that's a really useful starting point, I think, is looking at what were previous requests that were still unallocated.
Can I add one more thing to my question? So I'm sorry, I have three. Is then if there are projects that are not completely funded, right? There are plenty of times when there's partial funding for a project. I would love to, I think it'd be really helpful for us to know that as well. And we could be advocating for that. If it's, whether it's $100,000 or $1 million, it's always just helpful. But yeah, if you know what you know about social workers and what you know about basket pickup staffing.
Yeah, so let me go in reverse chronological order, which isn't going to work because I forgot the last thing that you said. What was the one?
Basically semi-funded projects.
Yeah, thank you. So I can say that we don't have any of those because that was one of our top priorities this year in capital funding, was to identify what outstanding partially funded projects existed and just get them over the finish line. Because as you said, for those of you who don't know, what is awful about partially funded projects is every year projects get more expensive. So if you allocate $100,000 to a $500,000 project this year, you're allocating 20%, but by next year, 16% has been allocated because the project has gotten more expensive. So every year your investment gets less and less valuable. So getting those projects over the finish line is incredibly important. So we tried to the best of our abilities. We coordinated pretty closely with School Construction Authority on this. We think we identified all of the partially funded school projects in our district and knocked them out. I'm trying to think which they were in. PS 51 had auditorium cooling. That was a partial that we finished.
33.
The other ones might be in CB2. I have to look.
I think the kitchen also. I think 33 kitchen.
Yeah. I think it's good. As long if there's none there, then
Anyway,
that's
yeah, sorry, I'm getting into the weeds. But yes, so partially funded, check, we're good. Social workers, as Matt can tell us, there are a number of deltas you have to cross. There is getting an agreement that they will be funded, getting the money allocated that they will be funded, getting the allocated money spent to actually hire the social workers, and then getting the social workers assigned. So I think you're right that there was an agreement to fund a social worker in every school. I want to say in like FY20. FY20, it was a couple of years ago that it happened. And then, of course, as with all good things that happened in February of 2020 and before, I'm sure it got completely derailed, and they would tell you about all the things that made it impossible for the past 2 years to actually, actualize that. I will say in the communications that we've had with our schools, I do believe there is a social worker at each of them. I do need to circle back. I want to double check on that, because when the conversation of budget cuts were happening, we had individual conversations with each of our principals to understand what the proposed cuts would have an effect on the ground. And I think that even after that, we were still able to maintain a social worker at each school, but like, don't quote me on that. I need to double check. That'll be something that I absolutely want to make sure we confirm in the coming months ahead of the next school year. Because again, I do believe all of that money was funded and was allocated. Now it's just a matter of making sure that those social workers get hired and they get placed in the schools. And then corner basket pickup. It's a good question about whether we were back to before, because they did it by routes. I know pre-pandemic, it was definitely at twice a day, 7 days a week across the city. So I know we returned to that, but I don't know if there were supplemental pickups in Community Board 4 and in Council District 3 that gave us an even greater number than that. Would it be 14 a week? I'm not going to do math at this point.
Yeah, no,
whatever it is. So I have to double check to make sure that we are. I don't know where the numbers are of where we as a district were pre-pandemic versus where we are now versus where the citywide is before.
Yeah, to my knowledge, we weren't anywhere above the citywide, whatever the citywide. So if we're saying that we're back to pre-pandemic, I think honestly that's good. It's not to say that it solves all of the sanitation problems we see on the street, but that's the most. I think we need to get back to where we were, at least as a baseline, before we start saying we as a district need more. So
and I will say, like, as a person who has spent more than single-digit nights just wandering around Hell's Kitchen reporting overflowing waste baskets to 311, I have noticed an improvement in overall corner waste basket. You still have issues, you still have exceptions, but I think as a rule, it has improved entering into the new fiscal year and with the enhanced sanitation services. I remembered what I wanted to say to Matt. One of the other ways that we can coordinate is right now there is conversation within the Hell's Kitchen Hudson Yard bid for a potential northward expansion of their borders on the 9th, 10th, and 11th Avenue corridors in the primarily business corridors of those areas. And with bid expansion would come enhanced sanitation services from the bid in those corridors. So I think that is something that Jesse can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there is a formal, an obligated community board role in bid expansion, but I think it's something that we as an office would be very interested in hearing the community board discuss and weigh in on. One of the things that we have explored as a possibility, as I talked about the supplemental ACE sanitation services that we receive, if a bid were to move northward into Hell's Kitchen and provide those supplementary sanitary services to 9th, 10th, and 11th, it would allow us to move those sanitation services perhaps more into the residential cross streets again, as a resident of 49th Street between 9th and 10th, we have some spots that are pretty notorious for illegal dumping. We have a vacant lot that just constantly has garbage being put in front of it, despite the constant 311 complaints I send to sanitation. So that is an opportunity where if we were able to do a bid expansion to cover the main avenues of Hell's Kitchen, that is an opportunity for those areas to be covered by the bid sanitation services, and for us to reallocate the supplemental sanitation services that our office allocates to other areas in Community Board 4 that also need them. So that is something I would ask for you all to just keep in the back of your mind and to start thinking about, as I think it has a few votes it has to go through in the bid to decide if that's something that they are interested internally in seeking expansion of. And then again, we will be very interested in getting feedback from the Community Board on what you all think makes the most sense as far as that's concerned.
We're going to go back to Matt. We're going to go to Sabrina, and then I'm actually going to cut it off for committee members, and we'll check in with folks from the public. Sabrina, you're up.
Sorry, my dog is trying to bark. Sophie barks, I'm sorry. So back to the question that Katie had before, and I'm sorry, Sean, if you already mentioned this, it's just, again, this is a very, very extremely personal subject for me because, full disclosure, I'm an asylum seeker. I've been pending asylum for over 6 years now from Venezuela, and I know how broken and difficult immigration is. So I'm just curious, again, if your office is helping asylum seekers in different levels, not just in the way of like, which is very important, obviously, like food and, I mean, not food, but clothing and directing them to school. But I'm also curious if all of these folks, Scooby, have been somehow directed to lawyers and any immigration assistance in our district. And again, I mean, I'm like, at this point, I'm sort of an expert. I'm not a lawyer, but I know immigration pretty well. So any assistance that can be provided, you know, I'm happy to do so as a community.
That's great. I mean, first off, you know, let us see Scooby. Don't deprive us of, if it's possible. I don't know how big Scooby is, but
He's a baby, but he has to be carries the whole thing. Come on, Scooby. I will show you in a second.
No rush, but you know, at some point. And then you're absolutely right. As there are a number of different needs that these asylum seekers need, in addition to, you know, the basics like food and clothing and diapers and all that. One of a really interesting thing that we've been working with New Alternatives for Children on is expediting domestic partnerships for asylum seekers, because oftentimes there are gay couples who are coming from areas in which they were not allowed to be together. They weren't, you know, there weren't legal opportunities for them to enter into marriages or domestic partnerships or any kind of civil arrangement. So in order to sort of achieve the benefits that they deserve as partners, as couples, we have to work with the clerk's office to expedite their appointments to get domestic partnerships established. So that's one sort of creative way that we are also trying to provide services. And again, that's happening a lot through New Alternatives for Children, a nonprofit that we are working with on those. I think it is certainly an all hands on deck situation. If folks have services or skills or abilities that they are able to provide and are interested and wanting to do so, that's fantastic. One of the things that we have also explored is we heard from the shelter provider in our district that they were looking for hair stylists, for barbers and the like, because so many of these people haven't had the opportunity to actually like have their hair cut or to have their hair styled or to feel good or to feel nice in so long. So sort of whatever you think you may be able to provide assistance with, however large or small or detailed or generic, I would say reach out Jesse has my info. You can reach out through the board and reach out to me. We would love to try to find a way, whatever you as an individual, or you as a member of a group, or you as a member of a community, or connections that you have, whatever exists that you, even if it's like, this is silly, nobody wants that, let us know. Worst case scenario, they say, we're good, but thank you so much. We're so grateful for the offer. And that's a pretty good place to be. So I think that's a great point. Snoopy. I think that's a great point, and certainly something that we would love to help facilitate however possible, because, as I said, the groups that are dedicated to asylum seekers are having trouble keeping up with demand. The nonprofits that are also just providing supplementary services to asylum seekers are having trouble keeping up with demand. So basically, I think every opportunity that we can provide, either to the city or through these shelter providers themselves or the nonprofits, we would love to be able to do so.
We'll go Matt, and then I'm going to go back on my word, and we'll take Aurora's question, and then we really will call it.
Thanks, Kit. I'll be quick. Just thinking about other sort of, and hopefully not mixing the pot too much, but Sean, if your office is doing participatory budgeting again, another avenue for folks on the committee who want to get involved and advocate on a particular capital project for their school, it's a great avenue to get some education projects passed. Some big things have won funding through PB over the last few years. So whether I plan to volunteer again this year with PB, but I think it's good at least to be aware of the projects that are going to be going forward for this committee, so we know what's going to be on the ballot, and if there are schools that we're talking to, we can help with those projects through that way of getting funding as well. And then that reminded me, Alan, to your point about programming and expense funding, and the way that we had sort of looked when doing participatory budgeting is looking at sort of like a needs assessment of the school. So looking at Title I schools, looking at the percentage of students on free or reduced lunches, and all of that data is available. So as far as figuring out how do we prioritize programming at what schools, and to Sean's point of being creative, I think looking at some of the data and thinking about how do we demonstrate where there's a need, and then that can help inform where budget priorities are set. So happy to work on those things. And I just kind of want to give a little plug for PB as well. Thanks.
Matt Green and Participatory Budgeting, name a more iconic duo. Incredible. You're absolutely right. Those of you, I'm sure many of you know Jordan Feiner from our team, who leads up our participatory budgeting effort. He has already started to remind me that PB is just around the corner. We will likely have a kickoff meeting, I think at the end of September, beginning of October, on the High Line, in which we'll talk about participatory budgeting and collect ideas for the upcoming year. As Matt said, it is a great opportunity for schools to get funding. We see the PS 111 HVAC system for the school auditorium. That was a participatory budgeting project that won. So that was $350,000 that went to PS 111 through participatory budgeting. For those of you who don't know participatory budgeting, it's an optional program that council members can take part in that sets aside 1 million of the $5 million that we get for discretionary capital funding to be decided on by the community how it gets spent. So we set aside the $1 million, and then starting this fall through the next many months, volunteers like Matt and amazing people who I'm sure you all know, like Phyllis Waisman and other great volunteers, will work with community members to develop ideas. So you don't have to have a fully fleshed out idea. You can say, there's this problem, and you work with one of our great experienced volunteers like Matt to come up with a capital project idea that could help fix that problem. And then through the participatory budgeting process, we work with a responsible agency to try to cultivate that project and that idea into something that's actually workable. And then at the end, usually about 10 to 12 projects wind up in a ballot that we spread out all throughout the district on a couple of weekends and have people vote on. And whichever projects get the most votes, those projects get funded. So that's a really fantastic opportunity for folks to get more involved in the budget process. Matt will be there, so you know that makes it cool. And yeah, we'll be sharing more information with you all soon. So be on the lookout for that. And thank you, Matt, for that reminder.
Aurora, all you.
Thanks, and thank you, Kip, for going back on your word, and thank you, Sean, for tonight. So my question goes back to Sabrina's question about immigration and just what you're doing as far as immigration, specifically with immigrants who are coming and migrating over who may not know English or Spanish as a language and might be using other dialects. Have you been able to partner with any social workers or teachers to kind of translate some of the more well-known, like Mixteco or Nahua, in those areas, especially for parents who are coming into this country and not really familiar with what our culture might be?
It's a great flag. I'll be honest, we have not, as an office, our role has mostly been in supporting the work of others on the ground. But that is absolutely something that I know the Department of Homeless Services, through their intake process and through the social workers that they have, that is absolutely a priority of theirs, is making sure that everyone is able to be interacted with and assisted in a culturally competent way. Culturally competent meaning not just language, but also in traditions, or for example, cultural competency would be recognizing that a same-sex couple wasn't able to be together in the place that they came from, and so being able to expedite the ability of them to form a domestic partnership legally to get access to the services that they are entitled to. That's the kind of cultural competency that I know the Department of Homeless Services and the providers have been striving toward, and that we have been pushing them to. It is a great flag for us to do continual oversight on, because that is one of the primary functions of the legislative body, is to provide oversight over the executive branch and their agencies. And I think that's something that we can certainly be pushing them on to always do better, and always make sure that they are taking that additional step to not just be responsive to the majority group that are coming, but everyone who comes, regardless of how specific their needs are. I think that's a really, really good flag, and I appreciate you bringing it up.
Ditto, I think it was a great question. I'm glad that we squeezed it in. Sean, I think that you're out of the hot seat. We really appreciate you coming and hanging out with us. Your presentation was super helpful. Thank you for answering many of the questions that we asked, and pledging to follow up on the ones that you need to track some things down for. I do think we would love to take your office up on coming back sometime, whether that's you or the council member specifically to talk about containerization. I actually wrote a letter about that. Feels like a long time ago, and it has come up intermittently ever since. So it's a topic that this group is very interested in continuing the dialogue around.
Yeah, you won't have to twist our arm. When Eric went to Barcelona a few months ago over the summer, and he came back with a camera reel just full of videos of containerization. There's like trucks picking up. I was like, "What's wrong? Go to La Sagrada Familia, you Philistine! Like, stop just following around garbage trucks." So no, we're totally on board with that. And let me just apologize. I feel like I may have blown up your record of ending before 8:30 tonight. So that's on me. But I look forward to turning my camera off and listening to the Fountain House presentation. So thank you all for having me, and yeah, have a great night.
Thanks again. And Jesse, just one quick flag is we should huddle at some point on when and how we can engage in the bid expansion discussions. That seems like something that there might be interest in. And then we can hold on this other piece until our last agenda item. All right. I believe we are turning it over to Rachel from Fountain House. If you have slides, I think you should be able to share your screen.
Fantastic. Hello, everyone. As I was introduced, I'm Rachel. I'm from Fountain House Gallery. I do have some slides, and I have very few updates about sanitation. So hopefully I can still keep you guys engaged. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Everyone should be able to be seeing things. I can't see anyone. Let us go forward. Okay. I apologize for the transitions. My assistant added them and I can't figure out how to take them away. So here we are. So Fountain House Gallery and Studio, more than a gallery of movement. So Fountain House Gallery and Studio is an organization that supports the recovery, creative visions, and careers of artists living with mental illness. We also are, I think, probably many of your neighbors. So we are on 9th Avenue between 48th and 49th Street, right there on the corner. So we probably see, you know, I definitely see the carriages in the morning trotting their way. We also have some of the similar problems with the bike lanes. Oops. Okay. So founded by Fountain House in 2000, our Hell's Kitchen Gallery sells artworks. We function pretty similarly to any other gallery, right? So we're a nonprofit space, which basically just means that we need funding to stay afloat, but that doesn't mean that we're not a commercial space. So our gallery does, you know, sell work. We're not just sort of a vanity gallery. We really are there sort of as an advocate for our artists and to be helping them generate income. A component of the kind of arts program at Fountain House is we also have a studio, which is located in Long Island City. So it's a little bit of a hike. We do run shuttles over there. We provide vans and we will provide transportation to our members. The studio provides, of course, free materials. We have a studio director who is wonderful. She provides technique classes and all of those sorts of things. One thing that I would flag is that, you know, we're not an art therapy program. We're really supporting different people who are approaching the arts that, you know, of course, could be useful for their recovery, but it's not necessarily as didactic or prescriptive as sort of art therapy can be. You know, each individual is working on their own art practice and we're not telling them what to do. Many of our artists as well are established or trained, right? So I think there's this sort of notion around Fountain House, particularly, right? We're working with a population of people who are living with serious mental illness. That doesn't mean that they also haven't been able to receive a bachelor's in fine arts. We have one of our members right now is actually receiving her MFA from Parsons. So many of our artists, you know, are accomplished in that way. They just have been dealing with kind of intersecting other resources or lack of resources rather that have, you know, led them to seek Fountain House as a space for them. So as I mentioned, the gallery and studio, we work with more than 100 members a year to provide opportunities, artistic talent, further mental health recovery, gain financial inclusion. And so then for those of you who are unfamiliar, so our parent organization is Fountain House, which is on 47th Street. It's been in the it's been around for about 75 years. We're celebrating our 75th anniversary this year, actually. And we've been in the neighborhood for just about as long. You probably are familiar with some of our members. We also have an incredible coffee station in Times Square called the Recharge Station. So we have a pretty big footprint in the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood. So we're a national mental health nonprofit fighting to improve health, increase opportunity, and end social and economic isolation for people living with serious mental illness. And so the gallery folds into that by providing a space, you know, that allows people to actualize their identities as artists, to find recovery through making art, and in many ways to help generate an income for themselves as well. Let's see if this will work. Amazing. So I don't know, is the sound perfect?
I would like to challenge anybody to imagine a world without art. the stigma of mental illness is really about telling people what they can't do. And here at the studio, we are not interested in anything that you cannot do. It's about reinforcing and encouraging people to become more of themselves.
I joined Fountain House when I was homeless, and I've been with them ever since 1988. I'm an artist, I'm a photographer and painter and writer. I used to sell in the street as a vendor. I was blessed. They offered me a position at the gallery. The first time I heard I work indoors in a safe environment, guaranteed that my work be seen by others.
Okay. Pausing it before you get to hear my point. But as you can see, that's an opportunity to sort of see some of our artists. I can share this link or perhaps the deck afterwards as well if you guys want to watch the rest of the video. Let's see here. So how does this work, right? So how does this model fold into the clubhouse model, and what do we sort of do at the gallery? I mentioned that it's not a vanity space, so how are we actually functioning? So the gallery itself functions as a cooperative business that's run by and for its artists. So that's, not a unheard of model, right? An artist-run space. The operations are supported by a small professional staff. So myself, we do have a social worker on staff along with a gallery assistant. But a really key component of the gallery is that we rely on volunteers. So on Saturdays, for instance, if you stop by, from opening to close, that's run by our members, which gives them an opportunity for professional development and to really be kind of connecting to people on their own terms. A really fantastic kind of consequence of the gallery, right, is it allows people to connect with our community in a way that is safe for our community. They're expressing themselves through their artwork. Maybe you're bumping into them at an exhibition and you're chatting with them about their work, but it kind of mediates or creates this like safer space where both parties, I think, can come together and intersect and really kind of learn from each other. As I mentioned, there is like a really significant economic component to this as well. Many of our artists and members of Fountain House are receiving benefits. They're on disability, they're on Social Security. There is a laundry list of limitations with that, including what amount of income you can bring in on a monthly basis and still receive those benefits. And then also, for a lot of other kind of intersecting and mitigating reasons, many of our artists are unable to work even sort of a part-time position. So when we are selling their work, they receive 60% of the sale of those pieces, and then 40% goes returns to the gallery to help support programming. Unlike the sort of rest of Fountain House, which qualifies for a wide variety of public funding, the gallery is privately funded. So we do sort of rely on sales, and we also have a benefit every year. Kind of the makeup of this, right? So we have 5 to 6 exhibitions a year, as well as presenting to an audience at the annual Outsider Art Fair, which is in March, along with other art fairs and external exhibitions. I've listed out some of our funders here, if any of those names mean anything to you, but we have a lot of longstanding relationships with these foundations, always looking to connect with more, if any are on your list, but these have been sort of longstanding and kind of intersecting foundations as well, some from the art space, some more from the mental health space. We just started a partnership actually with the Sozose Foundation, which has a mission around decriminalizing mental health and sees our art program as a key kind of innovative program that does that. Some photos, because it's always better to have a visual. So on the left here, we have a site-specific installation for annual art auction and benefit. That was this past June. This large-scale installation was done by one of our artists, Allison Vega, who is a very prolific textile artist. She suffered a brain tumor and had a long-standing career as a mathematics teacher, actually. And then, after for a brain tumor and a series of other sort of unfolding events, was unable to continue to keep her job, and really realized she kind of became, in what I think in many ways is the kind of view of these outsider artists, right? She was just kind of compulsively making and fabric and textile and fiber is her medium, and she created this large scale cocoon of different fiber pieces that you could sit in and kind of be absorbed by. Another sort of example of our programming here. So this past summer, from July to August, if anyone was walking by, you probably saw that there was a lot going on in the gallery. So we had a artist and professional development residency. So we had 7 artists that were actually working in the gallery. Instead of it just being a space for exhibitions, we really wanted to kind of turn it on its head, get the community to see our artists, right? You know, you're not just buying work by somebody who's schizophrenic, like you can meet them too, and they're totally fine and fun. Each artist as well hosted a public workshop. So they, you know, completely did the syllabus, lesson planned, put it together, and taught, you know, 1 to 2 hour workshop to the public. We had people, you know, registering off of Eventbrite. It was a really successful program. So we're looking to continue it throughout the year with the kind of public programming component. It was an incredible way to bring the public into our space. And also, of course, put something, you know, our artists can put this on their resumes or their CVs or things like that. And then just sort of this image here, of this work is just demonstrating kind of our reach, right? So we are in Hell's Kitchen. We're not in an arts district necessarily, but we do, you know, really try to work to expand the careers of our artists. This work particularly was sold to a collector in California. Online. The internet is, you know, an incredible place. Somebody found it on our website and purchased it there. And so it really kind of underscores also what we're attempting to do with our artists is help them reintegrate into the world, help them with their careers, and really help them also overcome what some of the barriers have been because of their mental illness and sort of see success in spite of it. So if I have you on the hook, we do have a couple upcoming events and exhibitions, 2 of which are actually this week. So we have a new exhibition opening entitled Animal Crossing, which is this Thursday from 6 to 8. We also have 2 booths at the Superfine Art Fair, which is going to take place in the Lower East Side, the 15th through the 18th. And then I think what is probably our most popular show, which we do annually around the holidays, the Small Work Show. All of the works are 5x7 and under. They're under $100. It's, you know, I like walk away very broke after this show because it's an incredible way to collect a lot of different pieces. Obviously, they make great gifts, but it's a really fun and lively show, and a great opportunity as well to sort of see the range of styles that our artists have and their different approaches to just sort of art making. Another really incredible project that's upcoming that I certainly wanted to put on everyone's radar. We have launched a multi-month initiative that is going to be culminating in an exhibition and interactive installation during the month of May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. The sort of mock-up schematic is this photo here. So we're in the process right now of collecting community stories. So both written, we have poetry, we have essays, we have performances, and we also, of course, have visual art illustrating what it's like to live in the world with a mental illness, or to navigate rather the world with a mental illness. And so these stories we're planning to illustrate, go through, you know, reproductions of the visual pieces, recordings, projections of the performances, etc., within this maze that you can sort of see here. So participants will be able to enter into them and sort of navigate their way around. And the final module, of course, will emphasize community-based recovery options, Fountain House being one of them, and will be staffed by a trained peer specialist, similar to the recharge station that we have in Times Square. to answer questions, provide resources to visitors, all of the sort of wonderful aftercare that might be necessary after sort of experiencing that, both from, reaching out to people who are maybe in need of resources and also just connecting the general public as well to sort of the resources that we can provide. So what are ways to get involved? First and foremost, I encourage everyone to support our artists. So that looks, can look a lot of different ways. You can join us for an upcoming exhibition. You can look on our website. You can go buy stuff from our artists. I promise that there is something for everyone, and some piece you will fall in love with. We do love our neighbors. Please stop by the gallery for a chat. We have many regulars of people who have lived in the neighborhood 10, 20, 30 years, and have a really strong relationship with Fountain House and the gallery. And then specifically for this kind of installation project that we're working on, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we are eagerly looking for rental space, either in the west side of Manhattan or Long Island City, to construct the physical structure in January. So if anybody has any hot leads on that, please let me know. And likewise, we're a nonprofit. We are a very small team. So any opportunities for marketing, PR, communications, anything like that, any leads, connections, are always appreciated. And then I've also dropped in some links to all of the places that we live online. And then perhaps, Jesse, I don't know if you want to I can send you a copy of this presentation. But that is us. So hopefully I gave, a good overview. I don't know if people have questions specifically. Very happy to chat about the specifics of the gallery or Fountain House in general, if you guys are unfamiliar with that model.
Thanks, Rachel. Anyone have questions about the presentation? Tamara, go ahead.
Hey, sorry, I lost you on my screen here. Hi, thank you so much, Rachel. A couple questions. As you were sort of hearing, we talked a lot about sanitation and the budget process in general, but arts is part of the scope of this committee. And so as a nonprofit, is there a specific sort of ask that you or Fountain House Galleries making that we could support or include as we do our sort of district needs as we're thinking about priorities? I think that would be super helpful to know, and whatever we could do, I'm sure the committee would want to support that. And then I was trying to take photos of the presentation. So if you could share it with the board office, that would be great. I know that you're sort of looking for rental space. We've been having some art organizations and cultural organizations come through to committee meetings. And recently there was one, the West Side Cultural Network, that my day job is that I'm at the Shed, but I'm also part of it, but it includes the Whitney, the Highline, Little Island. There's a good group of us. There might be some connections and synergies there. And so if you need any sort of support in connecting to some other spaces, I think the board office has their information as well. And we're also obviously happy to make those connections. So two-part, anything that we could do to support any ask that you have for public funding or any priorities for that, would love to know that. And then the offer about connecting you to some of the other West Side culturals. Yeah. And thanks so much for your work that you're doing.
Well, thank you for the offer. I will take any leads right now. I have been in touch with the Times Square Arts Alliance, so that's sort of our Times Square Alliance within the arts portion. So that's who I've been working with most closely. But I think in general, the gallery has a peculiar sort of situation where I think we're really deeply rooted in the intersection of 9th Avenue and 47th Street. But I think within maybe a little bit of like a larger arts context, has been struggling to sort of assert ourselves in some of these different spaces. I started as the director last October, so that's sort of been my beat, is to be making more introductions, particularly within nonprofit spaces. So I would happily take connections and any sort of resources you have there. I think in terms of funding, one thing that is sort of peculiar about the gallery as well is we, are a little bit of a hub in terms of, or maybe like a closed loop. I think in terms of funding for Fountain House, there are a tremendous number of innovative programmings and programs also that I think actually kind of align with you guys in terms of some of our on-ramps programming, which attempts to meet people who are experiencing street homelessness in the street and connect them to resources and some of these other things. So I'd be very curious and happy to share contacts if you guys need other overlapping connects in that way. My biggest focus right now, outside of continued funding for our programs and resources, would be to bring our studio from Long Island City to Manhattan, and preferably like one of our neighbors. So funding around nonprofit art spaces, it obviously would not need to be on a commercial street side level. It could be like 5th floor of any building. But that's something that's a really big priority because we desperately want to increase access to the studio. And it's Long Island City. There's lots of our members who have mobility issues. And so it's been a really big blocker. We're like busting at the seams there as it is. And our artists just need more resources. So that I think is something that I'm starting to zero in on. And then of course, this large installation is something that we're hoping to connect. And, I don't know if it's from a public funding standpoint. I do think that it has the potential to be a really significant project and obviously has a lot of kind of intersecting people or kind of stakeholders, I guess, in terms of it being in the public and there also being these resources and opportunity to really kind of connect from more of like a direct service perspective. So I don't know. So those are sort of my two immediate thoughts there. But I was like, it's also 8:30. So I was like, I might not be the freshest, but I definitely think my contact information will be passed around. So.
Any other questions?
Wow, easy.
Thank you for presenting, Rachel. Really interesting organization doing really great work. And we appreciate you taking some time to share it with us. Before we close out this agenda item, does anyone want to make any motions, propose writing any letters? Going right back to you, Tara.
Oh, I think we were gonna maybe, want me to keep going? I see other hands. Should I go? Kit?
Go ahead. I think you were first and then we can go to Lisa.
Thanks. Well, I would love to, if we could get a motion to write a letter of support acknowledging the amazing work that the Fountain House Gallery does. And I was trying to sort of write down how to summarize it. And since there's not a specific request besides for, I think, moving the studio and then getting support for the installation, can we sort of say that as a budget priority, or is it just a general letter of support? That's kind of a question I have.
I'll defer to Jesse because he knows more than me about basically everything. But I think we can write just a general letter of support and sort of indicate areas where we, might at some point include them as a budget priority. Does that work and make sense?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I think you highlight that Fountain House came and presented, and they specifically focused on the gallery, but obviously they've been in the community for a very long time with a lot of different programming, and so you can focus the idea of support on for the gallery program, but it could be a general letter of support for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
With that said, can I make a motion to support Fountain House Gallery, Fountain House in general, but really trying to direct it towards their arts-based programming that we've talked about, and I'm happy to draft it.
That is excellent. I'm happy to draft it. I appreciate you saving me from trying to beg somebody to do that. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
All right. Any discussion, or are we good to just vote? Let's just vote. All in favor, raise your hand. Thank you. I think I saw everybody, but anybody opposed? Any present not eligible? Any abstentions? All right, fantastic. It passes unanimously. Leslie, did you want to get a word in?
No, I just wanted to, Rachel, we'll talk offline like we have been, but I think if CB4 has a notice that goes out, Jesse, was it weekly or every other week?
Twice a month.
Okay, so of events. So that might be good to just, if you contact the office, they can put the, you know, all of the gallery events on their notice to people.
All right. Rachel, we appreciate it again. And I think we're going to close out that piece, and we have about 60 seconds for our final agenda item. I'm just kidding. We also have at least one new business item that I would like to suggest, that I can't actually do the motion on it. So let me try to just tee it up quickly, Alan, and then you should definitely chime in and make sure that we're talking about all the things that we need to. But the idea here was to begin what will be a multi-month conversation around how we want to approach the budget, the statement of district needs, the budget requests that we want to prioritize, and all of that will go through a formal process that each committee will take part in. Alan and I have had a couple of conversations, some with Jesse and staff, about things that we're interested in doing this year. I'll let him share more about that. But also just want to name that coming out of the conversation with Sean, I do think we should be reaching back out to Kelly, the superintendent of the district that we sort of have some of the same boundaries with, and see if there's any programs that he knows that the principals are excited about, to one of the points that Sean made, either to invite them back to present or to consider listing them as a possible budget request item. But Alan, do you want to take it away?
Well, generally, what we used to do in the past was send out letters to the various schools and try to get some responses back. I don't know how that's going to work this year, a little bit with all the stuff going on with the schools and everything budget-wise, but we can certainly still do that. And maybe follow up Sean's suggestion, follow up on his unfunded requests. Maybe divide up some of those schools. Some of the members already have favorite schools that they've been working with. We can certainly try to get some new requests that way. But I think we may need to do this a little bit through email in a way. We have a couple of groups that I also wanted to ask if anybody is interested in switching over to a different group. I'd like to get an updated list of members and emails to everybody else, and you can do some chatting outside of this venue, just to get some ideas tossed around in terms of where you want to see our budget requests go this year. I guess we're going to be budget. I think it's probably going to be meeting the end of this month or sometime. I don't know if the dates have been set up. Madam Budget Chair and Jesse, I don't know if you've come up with some dates yet.
No. So no, we haven't. Leslie and I have not solidified the dates yet. But we have this committee, just in terms of just understanding what the timing is. The committee has this committee, and then next month to decide and vote on sending their capital and expense priority list to the budget task force, which typically meets a couple times in October. maybe one time in September, one time in October. It's always a little bit varied. The way this month falls and with the holidays, I think it might be difficult to get off a meeting in September. But we'll have to see. So I was going to recommend something. I think in my experience doing this for as many years as I've done it, I think the trying to get that meeting with Kelly, and he is in the past has been willing to try to corral a few principals to that meeting. And we're not going to, the downside of that meeting is that you don't get like those those school specific projects necessarily, but what you did get last time was kind of an overview of what the district schools could use. And so you were speaking from that experience. In the meantime, what I think I can do without much trouble and too much effort, like Alan said through email, is that if we have that list of, usually what we have to do is we have to pound on the doors of the principals to give us some project and they're busy dealing with students and we feel guilty or weird writing them again and again and again. Now that we have that list and we have it from which schools submitted their ideas, I'm happy to do that myself. We have the school list, we have the principals. I can reach out and say, this is our understanding, these were ideas that are funding projects that you expressed interest in to the council member and to DOE. Where do these fall in your priority list? Where do they fall in your, which one, if you had to pick one, which one would it be? Or pick two, which one would it be? And so then hopefully between now and then the next committee meeting, I could hopefully give you guys any idea of those. So you'll get the school specific list ideas, hopefully, or at least some general ones the ones that respond and give us an idea of what those are the, which of those projects they want the most. And then you'll have the overarching concept needs from hopefully the meeting with Kelly that we can set up. That would be a daytime meeting. That would be a 9 to 5 business time business meeting, a business hour meeting. And I think that would solve, I think, everything you guys needed for education. I did drop in the most recent public library budget request for our district, which again, as always, is always Muhlenberg, and nothing about Columbus branch, but supposedly that's fine. But there's Muhlenberg there again, the never-ending HVAC system, as Matt Green can tell you. And then sanitation, I defer to you guys how you guys want to handle sanitation, but yeah. So I think that's what I would propose, at least for what I think could be the best way to do it. I do think the question, I think, and Al and I were talking at the beginning of this, is timing a little bit, because October's such a wonky month. We originally had you guys meeting on the 24th, Monday the 24th, because it was a Monday and we like to try to keep you guys on Mondays. But that will be difficult for you guys to get your information into the budget task force. And so I think the other date that would work is the 18th, is Tuesday the 18th, October 18th. And so which would give you guys a little more breathing room. And if we could get a quorum or enough people are okay with that, then we can move it to that month, that date. And you would be having to vote out your recommendations on the 18th though, because we have to vote out the statement of district needs by the November full board, which is the first Wednesday of the month in November.
So Jesse, can I ask a clarifying question about that?
You can.
So it sounds like what Sean was saying is that there's this list of what all of the principals told Councilmember Bottcher. And so he's going to forward that list to you. You're going to look at that list. you're going to reach out to the principals and say, all right, we see this list that you guys mentioned before. Like, what
So
would your, is that
the
what you're
list-
saying?
Yeah, the list is already in your Dropbox. There's a
Oh,
folder.
okay.
There's a folder in your Dropbox that says, I think it says Councilmember Bottcher's education budget information or something.
Okay.
We could, it's your discretion. Take that list, look at it, and just have a conversation about it amongst yourselves, and say, you know, we think this is, out of all of this stuff, we think these 3 capital projects are the, you know, just those are the most important. I mean, you guys can do that. You have this data. It's current data. There's some question marks on some of it in terms of just, you know, where maybe was it a wish list? You know, was it what level of priority it was? There's some of the schools have multiple requests. So, you know, but so you could do that, or we could do what I'm doing, what I suggested the first time. So, but you already have the information.
Okay. I think it's a great idea if you have the time, and or if you want some of us, and I'm happy to volunteer to call 2 of the schools or whatever we do.
I mean, listen,
if you can do it, awesome.
I don't mean to unempower the committee.
No.
If someone really wants to do it, I'm all for it. I'm just saying, it's part of, you know.
Yeah.
If
you can do it, the only thing I was going to say, Jesse, because you said we have to vote at the October meeting, it sounds like maybe there should be some discussion, and we sort of come up with a proposed list and everybody sees it ahead of time of like, all right, you know, according to Jesse's phone calls, these are the top 3 priorities from each school. And then the education subcommittee says, all right, well then let's pick these 4 or something.
Yeah, so I was going to suggest this because I think it would be great if what can happen is that Kit and Alan are able to present a proposed priority list next month.
Yeah.
What that requires is that the committee members and their groups, however you guys want to do it, similar to last year, kind of look at the existing list, right? Because some of the continued support stuff, if you look at the answers, have been funded. Some of the smart board things have been funded. The PS 111, as reported by DOE, the PS 11 ADA ramp situation has been funded. We can in writing confirmation that's when we can remove those things from the list, you know. And if we have the basket service, maybe that no longer becomes a major priority. Maybe that's a continued support. Maybe it's something else, and you're focusing on something else. I think then if you guys can create an internal deadline for yourselves, saying you're going to get Alan and Kit, every subgroup will get Alan and Kit their, you know, exec and capital proposed lists a week in advance of the committee or something. We throw it together in a spreadsheet. Everybody gets to review it, and then, you know, maybe you're shifting things around a little bit at the committee, but pretty much everybody's seen it. I think that's a good working model.
Okay.
This process.
And so, okay. And then you would reach out to the principals and then just let us know what the principals.
Yeah, my goal would be to be able to send the education subcommittee group, or at least maybe the person leading the education subcommittee group, the responses that I am getting from the principals. So, you know, there's a couple, like PS 111 has, I think, 3 things that are on that list that were funded. Maybe he says out of all of them, it's really the basement stuff, which we've been which is on our list already, which we've been advocating for. We've also been advocating for ADA, which is a very large project. I get it. He's going to probably be much more conservative with his choices because he knows what he can and what he can't. But
so then, yeah, and then you just mentioned PS 111, and so this goes to something that I had wanted to propose for the October meeting, but also goes to these budget suggestions and what we discussed, which is that I would love if we could maybe invite Iris Gersten, who works with students in temporary housing and a lot of the kids who are coming in, you know, the immigrant families. She's working with them in the shelters. And I know that PS 111 is one of the schools that has a lot of these students. Anyway, I'm just wondering, could we invite her to come speak at our October meeting about the needs of the students in our district? And could we also, and maybe we can find out from her and then maybe others, maybe there's some 501c3 doing work at PS 111 or PS 51 in connection with supporting these students that we could include in our budget request.
I think that's a fine idea. You should not wait till October. I think if someone has a working friendly relationship
Yeah, and I do, yeah.
with Iris,
yeah.
I think what's the best thing to do is to reach out and have that conversation with Iris. If they are specific nonprofits that have not come before us, I think that might be something we need to think about. We're just saying, yeah, we think this nonprofit should be funded when we don't really know them. But as a overall package of what we're trying to say, I think we can say funding, you guys have the right to say, you've had Iris come before you already. So I don't think you don't
have to have her come back.
You don't have to. I just think you don't want to wait also and try to synthesize what Iris is saying and also to synthesize the data that you've already collected. It's going to be hard. So I think if you, as someone who's interested in this, reach out, get that information, say, okay, Iris has given us what she suggests could really use help with funding. I think you put that into your document that you're then sending to Kitten Allen
Great. Thank you, Jesse.
That's the same concept as us going to Kelly and asking him what his thoughts are. We're going to put that back into the document. It's all going to come to the committee. Big, thorough discussion of everything, and then we vote it out. So I think also after sanitation, I always have a sit down with the superintendent for the district to sort of get in the weeds about what he really thinks. We can do that as well. So we'll have that.
One footnote to what Jesse said, Katie, is if Iris wants to come back and talk about this topic, either October or November, I unfortunately think it's probably going to be a challenge that just continues and continues to grow. And so even if we don't make requests this year aligned to whatever conversations we end up having with her, it seems like it's worthy of consideration and discussion, especially if she wants to talk to us about it again. Or if she wants to talk to us again about it.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say that she shouldn't come. I just was trying to say in terms of your workload, I think it's not,
Jesse, quick question on Molenberg. Isn't everything being done already? I mean, the library is closed, they're working on it. I think the HVAC was part of it, the elevator was part of it.
I think they're looking for
new?
continued support. If we want to say continued support, it's harmless. It's not taking a slot in one of our priorities. So they highlight out what each of the amounts are. I'd love to tell you that it's funded and but it was funded. It was funded 4 years ago.
I know, but
the longest HVAC program system I've ever seen.
I know, but the building is closed, and I think HVAC and elevators, all that stuff is part of a whole deal that they closed the.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. I don't think it should be. It shouldn't be nowhere near your. It should not, in my opinion. It doesn't require the.
Yeah, but this is something they're still asking. They're still asking about.
They're asking for support for the project. So I said,
I think want to make sure it gets done this time.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Tamara has her hand up. I don't know what she's going to talk about, but I was going to say the other acronyms we need to figure out what we want to be able to talk about in terms of prior budget stuff is arts and culture. And so I defer to Tamara and
so I think depending on when we schedule the larger meeting, if we're doing the October 18th, we can definitely get a subgroup together. I think I was actually trying to look back in the Dropbox. Like I know Hudson Guild came and presented before us. We just were talking about Fountain House. I did want to note that the library's letter also said for increased expense funding, and they mentioned some teen centers in there as well. So I think it's not just capital, but so wanted to flag that as well. So happy to try to pull together a subgroup for us to go through that. So we'll be prepared once we figure out the date.
And just for the new members, because we've got a handful of them on this committee, is so what happens here, right, is that each committee, all your other committees are going to be doing the same thing. You're going to be looking at last year's budget requests, the agency responses, cutting out pretty much the ones that are saying, "Oh, we funded it, it's great." We don't have all of that. We don't have huge amounts of wins, but we do get some wins. Maybe there's a reprioritization of them because of new and different information. Maybe because of a new issue that's just popped up, like the immigration stuff, like the asylum seekers. Maybe we're focusing on that. And so you, as a committee, you're gonna create a short list of expense and capitals projects that you, as a committee, think are the most important. Then each committee sends that to the budget task force. You fortunately have the chair of the budget task force, current budget task force, on your committee here, Leslie Bogdan Murphy. And then that's kind of the real discussions happen at the budget task force, because then they have to, all of those committees, each of those committees priorities have to be synthesized into one document. So that's the overarching thing. So that will be all happening in October. We've got to get it done by the November full board. And the other thing is obviously there's two parts of it. There's the budget requests, and then there's the statement of district needs. And each in the statement of district needs, it really does break it out by sort of topic. So there is a sanitation section. There is arts and culture section, libraries. There certainly is an education section. So I would also suggest taking a read of those sections, and if there's particular language that you all want to kind of update or include, I would make sure Leslie gets that, or send it, or maybe send it through Kit and Allen first. Actually, I'm sorry, Kit and Allen first, have that discussion. And then, if we want to update that stuff, then we can send that to the budget task force and say, we really want to make sure there's a section on, asylum seekers now, or something else in DOE that maybe was new, or something like that.
Leslie, did you want to get in?
Just quickly, it's unfortunate because looking back at what was funded, education got at least our asks, got the short end of the stick. I think everything we asked for, I don't think much anything was funded, right, Jesse, last round? A lot of housing we got.
Like I said, the PS1, the PS11 ramp got funded, the smart guards boards got funded. Portion of the PS111 basement project stuff, but a bunch of the other things have not been funded. The roof for the
security cameras, I think some of the elevator replacement at Ruston, Bayard Ruston. Yeah,
I will say we should look at that unfunded list that Sean provided, because those same schools, what I did notice was that, like for example, PS111 didn't mention the ADA stuff. Mm-hmm. They mentioned a bunch of other projects. So, maybe we need to take a step back and say, okay, PS11 is asking for this, 111 is asking for this. We need to maybe focus on those. And, I don't know.
And for some reason, with the budget request and even just regular projects, if you guys have found out throughout the year, it feels like the DOE is like their own monster. Like we have connection, we can always go to parks and ask for parks, and we have a continuing conversation with parks on what specifically we want, or a specific conversation with transportation. But for some reason with DOE, it just seems to always go into like this black hole of requests. So I just think
part of that is structural though, right? Like
exactly.
They've set up their own body to do what we do, the community education councils. And so I think there's a feeling, which isn't completely invalid, that there's some redundancy. So I would like to suggest some.
Let me just make, because Leslie came in a bit late today. Over the last 6 years, cycles, 80% of what we asked for was turned down. That's we've done about 85 requests in total from DOE. 80% of that gets lost, can't do it, can't fund it, blah, 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 blah. I think they rely mostly on the electeds to do a lot of this funding. If you go back to a lot of the other information that we've gotten from Borough President's office, from the council member's office, they do most of the funding in the same fund for the same request that we're asking for. So I think part of the whole mishigas, as they say, the whole jumble, is partially the fact that they know it's going to get funded somehow, but they're not paying for it. The electeds are going to take it out of the discretionary fund. That's what the deal is. So we're sort of, in a way, kind of spinning our wheels on this. So we maybe need to refocus on what we ask for and things that we know can get done through our requests, which is another conversation at some other time. But now we'll just go with what we have.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. We should focus and be really strategic with what we ask for. I also just think we should have realistic expectations that almost all the things we request are not going to be funded. So let's try to move this to a close. I think we have a lot of next steps coming out of tonight's meeting, and there is one new business item that I want to suggest. Jesse is going to look through the list that the principals generated and shared with the council member's office, follow up with principals and say, is this the priority? And if you have multiple things, which of these is the priority? Which I agree is the best way for us to get really relevant data on what the schools want. I will email Kelly about either meeting with us or letting us join a meeting that he has with the principals, similar to what we've done in previous years. Offline, we'll have to figure out when we're meeting in October. I don't think that I can make that date that you threw out work, Jesse, but we should talk about it over email. I'll be out of town for work. And the committees, the subcommittees should either meet or email or text message or use carrier pigeons to say what they think the priority should be for the different areas that this committee has responsibility over. And so if you are new to ACES and you have questions like, what are these subgroups that Kit and Jesse and Alan are talking about? Please email me and Alan, and we'll talk to you about which subgroups you would like to be on. There's one for education, one for arts and culture, and one for street life. And you can join the conversations about which areas each of those three groups want to suggest. And so the goal will be, whenever we are meeting next month, we have an initial list as a conversation starter that we can narrow in on. We'll both have to say which are the things that we want on our final list and what is the order, so that Leslie can incorporate that into the conversation that will happen across the committees about what are the board's priorities all in. Any other things that we should be doing before the next time that we're all together that I'm forgetting though? Jesse, Alan?
No, we can definitely talk offline about scheduling the next committee meeting. Right now it is for the 24th. I do think we should just maybe create a tentative deadline for you group folks to get you two information to prepare for the next meeting though. I just think it'd be helpful to say, like, if we want to say, I don't know if everybody's comfortable, like with the 14th of October, the deadline being the 14th of October, which is a Friday, that's getting everything to Alan and Kit I think that's and I'll send reminders, but I just want to make sure everybody's aware and on board with that.
Sounds good to me. Does that sound good to you, Alan?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
All right. Yep, all good.
Cool. Anything else on the budget piece before we shift to new business? Cool. So we have heard over the last couple of years on many occasions from Katie Savage about the heroic work that she is helping to spearhead, cleaning up the streets, and she now has a 501c3 that is official. I cannot make the motion, but I was wondering if somebody wanted to write a letter of support and make the motion for us to sort of formally endorse the work that her team is doing.
I make the motion.
Second.
Awesome. Anything specific that folks want to make sure that we call out in that letter? I feel like she is our most frequent participant in open sessions, and we've written like 4 or 5 letters where she's come up. But anything specific that we want to make sure that we call out?
I just think we need to clarify what, and Katie can send us this, what exactly she's asking for, so we get that detail. So we get that to Wendy and to Blake to make sure the letter is just accurate. And so that therefore, when you're voting on it in October, you're asking for a specific amount for a specific project.
Yeah, I think we can also include some historical background, how this all started, and
yeah, that's fine.
that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Very quickly before we do vote, Wendy and Blake, one of you, both of you excited about writing this thing? Not excited, but willing?
Overjoyed.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's good. Overjoyed is good.
So it sounds like maybe Wendy, you'll take the first pass, and Blake is signing up to help out with it. My reading faces right? Okay.
Works for me. That works for Blake.
Great.
Perfect. So I think what we're voting on is just a general letter of support for this new 501c3, summarizing some of its history, some of our historical positions connected to the work that they do, and then reaching out to Katie to see if there is a specific ask from a budgetary perspective, what that might be. Leslie, did you want to make a comment or have a question?
I was going to ask, is this to lay a foundation for a budget in our budget requests, our statement of district needs? The only reason why I say that is because, you know, I would be careful. I would be careful. We're trying to get funding to DSNY, and you know, it's a big. I mean, anyway, I don't know if we're laying groundwork for something here.
Well, we've already laid the groundwork, Leslie. I mean, you guys are already on record for being in support of the Litter Legion and some different forms of it. But
no, absolutely. But now that if it's it's different if, you know, for funding projects from the city.
Right. But she's going to be applying for discretionary, which is not city. I mean, it's city, but it's council. So, I mean, the document will be supportive of it. I think the conversation, where it needs to happen is the prioritization of that request. So the request shouldn't be included. It just in terms of would the board prioritize a larger, more impactful, you know, sanitation request over a discretionary funding for a nonprofit?
We'd love
That's the conversation that you as a committee can have next month. And
well, first the Street Life subgroup should have that conversation internally, and then we should have it as a whole group next month, if that makes sense.
Yep, makes sense.
Charlie, your hand's up.
Yeah, just on that topic, it sounded like from Sean talking earlier that Erik had wanted to give her discretionary funds last year, but she wasn't a 501. Now she is, so it seems like we're just sort of checking that box for Erik to know that he has our support in doing that.
Yeah. Awesome. I think we are out of hands that are up. So all in favor, please raise your hands. The letter as proposed and seconded. I can't see Mercedes, but everyone else looks like a yes. There she is. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Any present not eligible? All right. That, I believe, is it, unless anybody else has other new business. All right. We are 32 minutes past my self-imposed deadline, which I'm not going to be thrilled about, but I think we discussed some really important stuff, and we teed up the budget conversation for next month. So please keep Alan and myself in the loop as folks are having conversations in subgroups, and have a good rest of your evening. I think we're done.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.